Do you know that forgiveness isn't weakness? It's the strongest thing you can do. It's choosing your peace over their punishment. It's choosing your future over their past. It's choosing freedom. You did what? Maya Anderson's voice cracked through Daniel Croix's penthouse office like a whip. Her hands shook as she stared at the manila folder he'd just slid across his massive oak desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address in Newark, New Jersey, and a name she hadn't spoken aloud in 10 years. James Anderson. Her father. Daniel leaned back in his leather chair, completely calm, as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in the center of Maya's carefully constructed life. I hired a private investigator. Your father lives in Newark. He's been sober for 5 years. He works as a mechanic, and he's agreed to meet with you. You had no right. Maya's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room seemed to tilt. You had no right to do this. I had every right. You work for me. This is the job. The job is being your assistant, not your personal therapy project. She threw the folder back at him. It slid across the polished wood and fell to the floor, papers scattering. I don't want to see him. I will never want to see him. And you crossed a line you can't uncross. Hey everyone! Before we dive deeper into this explosive confrontation, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And tell me, Team Forgiveness or Team Some People Don't Deserve Second Chances. Let's talk about it in the comments below. Daniel stood slowly, his 6-foot frame imposing in the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Manhattan's glittering skyline behind him. Sit down, Maya. I'm leaving. I quit. Sit down. Something in his voice, not anger, but a bone-deep weariness, made her pause. She'd been working for Daniel Croix for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of increasingly invasive assignments. 3 weeks of him systematically dismantling every wall she'd built around her past. 3 weeks of feeling like she was being psychologically dissected by the world's most famous self-help author. But she'd never heard him sound like this, broken, almost afraid. Maya sat. Daniel walked to the window, his back to her. I did the same thing to myself, he said quietly. I hired the same investigator. He found my biological father, Frank Croix, the man who gave me up when I was 3 years old, the man I've spent 45 years resenting. He lives in Brooklyn, and he also agreed to meet. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Maya's anger flickered, confusion replacing it. You what? The meeting is in 2 days. Friday at 2 p.m. I'm terrified. I want to cancel. I've already tried to cancel 3 times, but my therapist won't let me. He turned to face her, and Maya saw something she'd never seen before. Vulnerability in Daniel Croix's eyes. I need you there with me. Why? Because if I do this alone, I'll run. I'll make excuses. I'll intellectualize it until it becomes just another chapter in a book instead of something I actually have to live through. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. I need someone who understands. Someone who's as terrified as I am. Someone who has as much to lose. Maya felt her chest tighten. I'm not ready. Neither am I. That's exactly why we have to do it. 3 weeks earlier, the eviction notice on Maya's apartment door was printed on official New York City letterhead, 30 days. She had 30 days to come up with 3 months' back rent plus late fees, or she'd be on the street. Her bank account had $37. Her refrigerator had a bottle of ketchup and half a jar of peanut butter. Her future had nothing. At 28 years old, Maya Anderson was drowning. She sat on her floor, calling it an apartment was generous. It was essentially a renovated closet in Washington Heights, with a hot plate and a window that overlooked a brick wall, and scrolled through job listings on her cracked phone screen. Copywriter positions, marketing coordinator roles, executive assistant openings. She'd applied to 47 in the last 6 weeks. 47 rejections. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Is this Maya Anderson? The voice was female, crisp, professional, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who'd never worried about rent in their entire life. Depends on who's asking. My name is Claire Robbins. I'm calling on behalf of Daniel Croix. Are you familiar with his work? Maya's breath caught. Daniel Croix, the billionaire self-help author, the man who'd built an empire, teaching people how to forgive, how to heal, how to release the past and step into their best lives. His books, The Weight of Grudges, releasing yesterday, The Freedom in Forgiveness, had sold over 100 million copies worldwide. Even Maya, who actively avoided anything that smelled like toxic positivity, knew who Daniel Croix was. I know who he is, Maya said carefully. Mr. Croix is looking for a personal assistant. Your resume crossed my desk. He'd like to meet with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. His penthouse office in Tribeca. I never applied to work for Daniel Croix. Nevertheless, he's interested. The salary is $250,000 annually, plus benefits and a housing stipend. Will you be there? Maya looked around her pathetic apartment. At the eviction notice, at the rejection emails, at the life she was failing to build despite doing everything supposedly right. I'll be there. The elevator to Daniel's penthouse was made of glass and chrome and moved so smoothly, Maya barely felt it ascending 47 floors. She wore her only interview outfit, a thrift store blazer and pants she'd hemmed herself because tailoring was a luxury she couldn't afford. She felt like an imposter in a building where the doorman's suit probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. The elevator opened directly into Daniel's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, abstract art that probably cost 6 figures, and behind a desk that looked carved from a single piece of wood sat Daniel Croix himself. He was younger than his author photos suggested, maybe mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail about her in a single glance. Handsome in an understated way. Powerful in a way that had nothing to do with the expensive suit. Maya Anderson, he said, without standing, without offering a handshake. Sit. She sat. He studied her in silence. The silence stretched, became uncomfortable, became unbearable. Maya fought the urge to fidget, to fill the space with nervous chatter. She'd read somewhere that powerful people used silence as a weapon. Daniel Croix wielded it like a scalpel. You're wondering why you're here, he finally said. The thought crossed my mind. Your resume is impressive. Columbia graduate, English major, freelance copywriter for 6 years, strong portfolio, good references. He paused deliberately. But none of that is why I wanted to meet you. Then why? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. Because of what you didn't put on your resume. Your mother, Patricia Anderson, died 4 years ago, heart attack. But the medical examiner noted she'd been under extreme stress for years. Your father, James Anderson, haven't spoken to him in 10 years. Not since he walked out when you were 18, taking the family savings to pay off gambling debts and leaving you and your mother to pick up the pieces he left behind. The air left Maya's lungs. How do you? I do extensive research on anyone who enters my orbit. The question is, why did you lie on your application? You checked the box saying you have a close relationship with both parents. Heat flooded Maya's face. I told you, I never filled out an application for this job. I didn't even know you were hiring. Daniel's smile was sharp, almost predatory. No, you didn't apply. I found you. I've been looking for someone exactly like you for months. Someone brilliant. Someone capable. Someone carrying around a wound so deep they've built their entire personality around protecting it. Someone who needs what I'm offering as much as I need what they can give me. Which is what, exactly? Honesty. He stood, walked to the window, gazed out at Manhattan, spread below them like a kingdom. I'm writing my final book, Maya, a memoir, about forgiveness, about facing the person who hurt you most, about doing the actual work instead of just writing pretty words about it. He turned back to face her. I need an assistant who won't let me hide from the truth, someone who will call me on my bullshit, someone who understands pain deeply enough to recognize when I'm faking healing. And you think that's me? I know it's me. You've spent 10 years perfecting the art of looking functional while being completely destroyed inside. I can see it. I recognize it because I do the same thing. He walked back to his desk, pulled out a contract, $250,000 a year, housing stipend that'll get you out of that closet in Washington Heights, full benefits. All you have to do is be honest with me and eventually with yourself. Maya's hands trembled as she looked at the contract. What's the catch? The catch is that working for me means confronting everything you've been running from. Your father, your mother's death, the rage you've turned into armor. I'm going to push you. I'm going to make you uncomfortable. I'm going to force you to ask whether holding onto your anger is actually protecting you or just keeping you trapped. Why would you do that? Because I'm doing the same thing to myself. And I need a witness. Someone who's in the trenches with me. Someone who won't let me quit when it gets hard, which it will. He slid the contract across the desk. So here's my first question, and depending on how you answer it, this interview is either over or just beginning. When was the last time you spoke to your father? The question hit like a physical blow. Maya could feel 10 years of carefully constructed walls threatening to crack. She could lie, walk away, go back to her eviction notice and her empty refrigerator and her 47th rejection email. Or she could tell the truth. Last week, she lied. Daniel didn't blink. Try again. Silence. The truth, Maya. Something inside her broke. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the desperate hope that someone, anyone, could help her find a way out of the prison she'd been living in. 10 years, she whispered. I haven't spoken to him in 10 years. I don't know where he is. I don't care where he is. He destroyed my mother. He destroyed our family. And if I never see him again, it'll be too soon. Daniel nodded slowly, something like satisfaction crossing his face. Now we're getting somewhere. One more question. Do you want to forgive him? No, never. Perfect. I'm not looking for someone who's already healed. I'm looking for someone who's willing to do the work, the real, messy, ugly work that my books make sound easy but is actually hell. He extended his hand. Welcome to the team, Maya. This job is going to ruin your life in all the best ways possible. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Maya shook his hand. The contract felt like a deal with the devil. She had no idea she was right. She had no idea that in 3 weeks Daniel would track down her father without permission, that he would force her to confront the man she'd spent a decade hating, that he would break her open and leave her bleeding before teaching her how to heal. But most of all, she had no idea that the billionaire teaching the world about forgiveness was the one who needed it most. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in Daniel's office, staring at her father's address, and the real work was about to begin. Want to know what happens when Maya and Daniel finally face their fathers? Will the lessons that made Daniel a billionaire actually work in real life? Drop a like and subscribe, because what happens next will blow your mind. This is just the beginning. Maya stared at Daniel Croix, billionaire, best-selling author, the man millions turned to for wisdom about healing, and realized he was just as broken as she was, maybe more. You manipulated me, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You hired me, knowing you were going to do this. You've been planning this from day one. Yes. The admission was so blunt it knocked the wind out of her anger. Daniel walked back to his desk, pulled out a second folder, this one thicker, and dropped it between them. Frank Croix Sr., Daniel said, age 68, lives in a rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, retired construction worker, volunteers at a community center teaching kids woodworking. He opened the folder, and Maya saw photographs. An old man with kind eyes, grey hair, worn hands. He gave me up when I was 3 because he was 19 and terrified and thought I'd have a better life with a real family. I spent the next 15 years being passed between 14 foster homes, 14 families who decided I wasn't worth keeping. Maya saw the pain flash across Daniel's face, raw and unguarded. I built an empire, teaching people how to forgive, Daniel continued. I've made billions telling others to release their resentment, to free themselves from the past. And I've never forgiven the one person who broke me first. I'm a fraud, Maya, a very successful, very wealthy fraud. And I can't keep living this lie. So, you decided to drag me into your crisis? I decided we could face our demons together, because doing it alone is how people fail, how I'll fail. He met her eyes. I'm asking you to be my accountability partner. Come with me to meet Frank. Watch me try to practice what I preach. And maybe, just maybe, it'll show you that facing your father won't destroy you. It'll free you. And if I refuse? Then I'll write you a severance check for a year's salary and never contact you again. But you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if I was right. If forgiveness could have changed everything. If you threw away your one chance at freedom because you were too scared to try, the manipulation was obvious. Textbook, even. But Maya couldn't deny the truth in his words. She'd spent 10 years running from her father, and that running had gotten her exactly nowhere. Broke. Alone. Angry at everyone and everything. I'll come to your meeting, Maya said finally. But I'm not promising anything about mine. Fair enough. Daniel's expression softened slightly. The meeting is Friday, 2 p.m. Brooklyn. I suggest you prepare yourself. This is going to be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. Friday, 1:45 p.m. The subway ride to Brooklyn felt like traveling to an execution. Maya sat beside Daniel in the rattling train car, watching him spiral. His leg bounced constantly. He checked his phone every 30 seconds. Twice, he stood up as if to leave, then sat back down. The composed billionaire from the penthouse office had been replaced by a terrified little boy. I can't do this, Daniel muttered for the 5th time. Yes, you can. What if he hates me? What if seeing me just reminds him of his worst mistake? What if... Daniel. Maya grabbed his shaking hand. You teach this for a living. What would you tell someone in your position? He laughed bitterly. I'd tell them that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about releasing the power they have over you. I'd say that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I'd use all the beautiful metaphors I've perfected over 20 years of writing, and I'd be full of shit, because knowing what to do and actually doing it are completely different things. He looked at her and his eyes were wet. What if my whole philosophy is garbage, Maya? What if I've been selling people a lie? Then we're about to find out. The train screeched to their stop. Daniel stood slowly, like a man walking to the gallows. Maya followed him up the stairs, into the Brooklyn afternoon, toward the modest apartment building where Frank Croix lived. With each step, Daniel seemed to shrink. His shoulders hunched. His breathing became shallow. By the time they reached the building's entrance, he was visibly trembling. I can't. You can. Maya pressed the buzzer for apartment 4B before he could change his mind. A crackling voice came through the speaker. Hello? Daniel froze. The voice, his father's voice, seemed to paralyze him completely. Maya pressed the button. Frank Croix, this is Maya Anderson. I'm here with Daniel. We're coming up. The door buzzed. Daniel looked at Maya with something between gratitude and terror. They climbed the 4 flights in silence. Each step felt heavier than the last. When they reached apartment 4B, Daniel stood in front of the door for a full minute before knocking. The door opened. Frank Croix was smaller than Maya expected. 68 years old, grey-haired, with gentle eyes that went wide with shock when he saw Daniel. He was wearing a cardigan like someone's grandfather. Daniel, Frank whispered, and his voice cracked on the single word. Daniel stood frozen. Maya watched him transform from a confident billionaire into a 3-year-old boy whose father had walked away. It was devastating. "Can we come in?" Daniel managed. Frank stepped aside wordlessly. The apartment was small but immaculate. Modest furniture, clean surfaces, and everywhere were Daniel's books. All of them lined up on shelves, stacked on the coffee table, dog-eared and highlighted, and clearly read multiple times. Daniel saw them, and something in his face crumbled. "I've read everything you've written," Frank said quietly, "some of them 5, 6 times. I'm so proud of what you've become, what you've achieved. You don't have the right to be proud of me." Daniel's voice was ice. "You weren't there. You gave me up. You threw me away like I was garbage." Frank flinched but didn't look away. "You're right. I don't have the right, but I am anyway." They sat Maya on a chair by the wall, Daniel and Frank on opposite ends of a worn sofa. An impossible distance between them, despite being only feet apart. "Why did you give me up?" Daniel asked, and his voice broke on the question he'd been carrying for 45 years. Frank's hands trembled in his lap. "Your mother left when you were 2, disappeared. I was 19 years old, working 2 jobs, could barely afford diapers. I kept you for a year. A whole year I tried. But I was failing. You were crying all the time, and I didn't know how to help you. I didn't know how to be a father. I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought you deserved better, a real family, 2 parents, stability, everything I couldn't give you. So you gave me to the state, to strangers. I gave you to a system that promised they'd find you a good home, a loving family. They didn't." Daniel's tears fell freely now. "I had 14 families, Frank. 14. None of them kept me. Do you know what that does to a child? To be rejected over and over? To never be good enough for anyone to want to keep?" Frank was crying too. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. They wouldn't tell me where you were. The records were sealed. I tried to find you when you were 7, hired a lawyer I couldn't afford. He said it was impossible. I tried again when you were 13. Same answer. Eventually, I stopped trying because I convinced myself you were better off without me, that the father who abandoned you would only cause more pain. You were right. You did cause more pain. You caused 45 years of it." The words hung in the air like daggers. Maya watched Daniel's face cycle through emotions, rage, grief, pain, and finally, something that looked like the beginning of understanding. This was the moment, the climax of every lesson he'd taught. Forgiveness wasn't about whether Frank deserved it. It was about whether Daniel deserved to be free. Daniel took a shaking breath. "I came here to tell you that I forgive you." Frank's face crumpled with relief. "I came here," Daniel continued, his voice stronger now, "to practice what I've been preaching for 20 years, to release the resentment, to be the bigger person, to show that forgiveness is possible even in the worst circumstances." "Daniel, I forgive you," Daniel said. And the words came out like a confession, like a prayer, like the hardest thing he'd ever said, for giving me up, for not fighting harder to find me, for all the years I spent wondering if I was unlovable. "I forgive you." And then he broke. Not quiet tears, gut-wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. 45 years of pain pouring out in waves. Frank moved instinctively to comfort him, then stopped himself, uncertain if touch was allowed. Maya sat frozen, watching a man who'd taught millions how to heal completely fall apart. But then Frank said the words that destroyed everything. "Daniel, I can't accept that." The room went silent, except for Daniel's ragged breathing. "What?" Daniel looked up, confused, devastated. Frank's face was twisted with anguish. "I've read all your books. I understand what you're saying. I understand forgiveness, but I don't deserve it from you. I destroyed your childhood. I stole your chance at a normal life. How can I accept forgiveness for that? That's how this works. I forgive you. You accept it. We move forward. But I haven't forgiven myself." Frank's voice was barely a whisper. "How can I accept your forgiveness when I can't forgive myself for what I did to you?" The question hung in the air like poison. Daniel stared at his father with an expression of complete betrayal. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd written about this scenario 1,000 times. The child confronts the parent, the child offers forgiveness. The parent accepts. They heal together. It was supposed to be clean, beautiful, redemptive. Instead, it was a disaster. "You have to accept it," Daniel said desperately. "You have to. I came here. I did the work. I said the words. You're supposed to." "I'm supposed to what? Pretend I don't hate myself for what I did to you? Pretend that reading about your foster care years in that interview didn't make me want to die? Pretend that I deserve a second chance?" Frank was crying openly now. "I don't, Daniel. I don't deserve your forgiveness. And accepting it would be another betrayal, pretending I didn't do something unforgivable." Something inside Daniel shattered. Maya could see it happen. The entire philosophical framework he'd built his life around, collapsing like a house of cards. He'd studied forgiveness from every angle, written about it, taught it, made billions on it. But he'd never encountered this, the person too broken to receive forgiveness, making the forgiveness itself meaningless. Daniel stood abruptly. "I need to leave." "Daniel, please." "I said I need to leave." He practically ran for the door. Maya jumped up, mumbled an apology to Frank, whose face held a grief so profound it was almost unbearable to witness, and chased after Daniel. She found him in the stairwell, collapsed against the wall, hyperventilating. "I did everything right," he gasped. "I followed every step. I meant it. I really meant it. And it didn't matter. He couldn't accept it. What's the point of forgiveness if the other person is too broken to receive it?" Maya knelt beside him, having no answers, watching the man who was supposed to have all the answers fall completely apart. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying. If Daniel Croix, with all his wisdom, all his success, all his years of studying forgiveness, couldn't make it work, what chance did she have? Daniel's philosophy just crashed and burned. His father rejected his forgiveness. Everything he's taught for 20 years might be a lie, and Maya's father is still waiting in Newark, expecting to hear from her. What happens when the teacher becomes the student? When the mentor needs saving? Subscribe and hit that notification bell, because part 3 is going to flip everything upside down. You won't believe what Maya does next. The next 72 hours were the longest of Maya's life. Daniel disappeared. Not literally, he was locked inside his penthouse, but he might as well have vanished from the earth. He didn't answer calls, didn't respond to texts. When Maya used her emergency key to check on him Tuesday morning, she found his apartment in complete chaos. Empty whiskey bottles lined the kitchen counter. The manuscript for his memoir, hundreds of pages, was torn into pieces and scattered across the living room floor like snow. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the million-dollar Manhattan view. And Daniel himself was passed out on the leather couch, still wearing the same clothes from Friday's meeting with Frank. 3 days of stubble darkening his jaw. Daniel. Maya shook his shoulder. Daniel, wake up. He groaned, rolled over, squinted at her with bloodshot eyes. Go away. Not a chance. Sit up. I said go away, Maya. You're fired. Consider yourself terminated. I'll have Claire send the severance paperwork. I don't work for you anymore anyway. I quit. Remember? So now I'm here as your friend. Sit up. Something in her tone, maybe the fact that she was using his own tactics against him, made Daniel slowly push himself upright. He looked terrible. Worse than terrible. He looked like a man who'd bet everything on a philosophy and watched it crumble to dust. I'm a fraud, he said, his voice hoarse and raw. Everything I built is a lie. We've established that. What else? I don't know how to forgive. I only know how to write about forgiveness. There's a massive difference, and I just proved it in the most spectacular way possible. He gestured at the destroyed manuscript. 20 years. 20 years of research, of interviews, of building a framework for healing. And when it actually mattered, when I stood in front of my father and tried to do the work, it didn't work. He couldn't accept it, and I didn't know what to do next. Maya sat down beside him, shoving empty bottles aside. So your philosophy isn't perfect. So what? So what? Daniel's laugh was bitter. My entire empire is built on the idea that forgiveness heals all wounds, that if you follow the steps, do the work, release the resentment, everything gets better. But Frank showed me the truth. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't work. Sometimes the other person is too damaged to receive it. Sometimes you can do everything right and still fail. Or maybe, Maya said slowly, your philosophy was incomplete. Maybe you wrote about forgiveness from one side, the person offering it without fully understanding what happens when the person on the other side can't accept it because they haven't forgiven themselves. Daniel looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. What are you saying? I'm saying Frank doesn't need your forgiveness, Daniel. He needs permission to forgive himself. And you can't give him that. Only he can do that work. Your forgiveness opened a door, but he's too scared to walk through it because he thinks he doesn't deserve to. So, what am I supposed to do? Just wait? Hope he eventually decides he's worthy? Or you could help him get there. Therapy, conversation, time. You thought forgiveness was a single moment. I forgive you. End of story. Roll credits. But it's not. It's a process. You and Frank aren't done. You've barely started. Daniel stared at the torn manuscript on his floor. I don't know how to do this. then learn, the same way you're forcing me to learn. Maya stood, started gathering the torn pages. You told me that forgiveness is about releasing the hook from your own heart. Well, you released it. You told Frank you forgive him. That wasn't fake. That was real. Now the rest is his journey. You can walk it with him or keep drinking yourself into oblivion. But either way, you did what you needed to do. It didn't feel like enough, because you wanted a fairy tale ending. You wanted him to cry, accept your forgiveness, and for both of you to ride off into the sunset of perfect healing. But life is messier than your books, Daniel. Doesn't make the forgiveness less real, just makes it more complicated. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher. Even if he is currently having a breakdown, surrounded by empty bottles and his own destroyed book." A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. Then it faded. "Did you see your father?" The question hit like a physical blow. Maya's hands stilled on the manuscript pages she was gathering. "No." "Why not?" "Because watching you fall apart didn't exactly inspire confidence in the whole forgiveness process." "Fair point." Daniel rubbed his face. "Did he try to contact you?" Maya's phone felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. She'd received a text Sunday morning. She'd read it 17 times. She'd typed and deleted responses at least 30 times. The text said, "Hi Maya, it's your dad. The man who hired you, Daniel, gave me your number. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm in New York for work this week, staying through Friday. If you want to talk, I'm here. No pressure, no expectations, just I'm here. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. If you decide to reach out, I'll answer. If you don't, I understand. Love, Dad." The word love had made her cry. She hadn't cried about her father in years. "He texted me," Maya admitted. "He's in New York. He wants to meet. Are you going to?" "I don't know. Watching you with Frank, it scared me, Daniel. What if I do all this work, face all this pain, and it doesn't fix anything? What if I forgive him and I'm still angry? What if I forgive him and he can't accept it, like Frank? What if you spend the rest of your life wondering?" Daniel interrupted. "What if you're 80 years old, looking back, and the biggest regret you have is that you were too scared to try? What if forgiveness doesn't fix you, but at least it gives you the answer instead of leaving you trapped in the question?" Maya felt tears burning her eyes. "I'm terrified." "Good. That means it matters." Daniel stood, walked to the window, pulled back the curtains. Afternoon light flooded the penthouse. "I'm going back to see Frank tomorrow. I'm going to tell him that I'm not taking back my forgiveness, that it's his to accept or reject, but I'm not carrying the weight of his guilt for him anymore. And I'm going to ask if he'll do therapy with me. Not to fix everything overnight, just to start." That sounds healthy. It sounds terrifying. But you were right. I wrote about forgiveness like it's a destination. It's not. It's a journey, and I've been too much of a coward to actually take the first step. He turned to face her. "Will you see your father?" "Not for me. Not because I'm manipulating you. but because you deserve to know what's on the other side of that fear? Maya pulled out her phone, looked at her father's message for the 18th time. If I do this, she said slowly, you have to promise me something, anything. If it goes badly, if I fall apart the way you did, you have to be there to pick up the pieces, because I can't do this alone. Daniel crossed the room, pulled her into a hug. It was the first genuinely warm gesture he'd ever made. We do this together. That was always the deal. Maya pulled back, wiped her eyes, and before she could change her mind, she typed out a response to her father. I'm free Thursday afternoon. There's a cafe in Queens. Mel's Diner, 2 p.m. She hit send before her courage failed her. Her father's response came 30 seconds later. I'll be there. Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for being braver than I ever was. Thursday, 1:55 p.m. Mel's Diner in Queens was exactly the kind of place Maya needed. Small, public enough to feel safe. Far enough from Manhattan that she could disappear if necessary. The vinyl booths had seen better decades. The coffee came in chipped mugs. The waitress had the exhausted smile of someone who'd been serving breakfast specials for 30 years. Maya sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around a coffee mug she wasn't drinking, watching the door like it was a ticking bomb. At exactly 2 p.m., James Anderson walked in. He looked nothing like her memories. Her memories had frozen him at 38, drunk, angry, desperate, walking out their door with 2 suitcases and promises to fix everything that never came true. The man scanning the diner now was 48, grey at the temples, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard-won peace rather than hard living. He wore a mechanic's jacket with Newark Auto Repair stitched on the pocket. His hands were clean but permanently stained with engine grease under the nails. When his eyes found hers, they filled with tears. James walked to her booth slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. Maya. Her name came out like a prayer. Sit down. He sat across from her, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Thank you for coming, James finally said. I honestly didn't think you would. Maya didn't respond. She'd promised herself she would listen, nothing more. I'm not going to pretend this isn't awkward as hell, James continued. I don't have a speech prepared. I don't have excuses. I just have the truth, if you're willing to hear it. I'm here, aren't I? He nodded. I destroyed your childhood. I destroyed your mother. I destroyed our family because I was a coward and a gambling addict who chose cards over the people I was supposed to protect. Patricia. His voice cracked on her mother's name. Your mother deserved so much better than me. You both did. The old anger rose in Maya's chest, hot and familiar. You don't get to say her name. You don't get to sit there acting like you cared about her when you're the reason she's dead. You're absolutely right. I killed her as surely as if I'd pulled a trigger myself. The stress, the heartbreak, the years she spent working double shifts to cover my debts, that heart attack was my fault. James looked directly at her, not flinching. I've been sober for 5 years, Maya. I go to Gamblers Anonymous 3 times a week. I've worked with a sponsor. I've made amends where I could. But I can't bring your mother back. I can't give you the stable childhood you should have had. I can only tell you that the man who walked out that door 10 years ago died a long time ago. I'm not him anymore. People don't change. The words came out automatically, but Maya heard the doubt in her own voice. Most people don't. I almost didn't. I hit rock bottom so many times, I thought there was no further down to go. But then, he pulled out his wallet, extracted a worn sobriety chip, 5 years clean, 5 years of therapy, 5 years of trying to become someone who might deserve a conversation with his daughter. Maya stared at the chip. Why now? Why reach out after all this time? Because your boss found me, told me you were struggling, said you were angry and you had every right to be, but that the anger was keeping you trapped. He offered to set this up. No expectations. He said if you showed up, it meant you were ready. If you didn't, he'd never contact me again. James met her eyes. So, are you ready, Maya? Ready for what? To forgive you? To pretend the last 10 years didn't happen? No. Ready to decide if you want to keep carrying me around like a stone in your heart, or if you want to put me down. Maybe we never have a relationship. Maybe you walk out of here and I never see you again. But at least you'll have done it on purpose, not because you were too afraid to face me. There it was. The truth Maya had been avoiding. Her anger at her father had become her identity. Her armor, her excuse for every relationship that failed, every risk she didn't take, every moment she chose safety over vulnerability. If she let go of the anger, who would she be? Tell me about Mom's last years, James said quietly. I need to know. I need to understand what I did to her. Will Maya finally open up about her mother's suffering? Will she find the courage to forgive? Or will she walk away forever? And what happens when she has to help Daniel face Frank again? The conclusion is coming, and it's going to hit you right in the heart. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the finale. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. Maya told her father everything. She told him about the double shifts their mother worked at the hospital, coming home at midnight, smelling like disinfectant and exhaustion. She told him about the bills that kept coming, creditors calling at all hours, threatening letters piled on the kitchen table, the shame of having their electricity cut off twice. She told him about downsizing from their modest 2-bedroom apartment to a studio, then to an even smaller studio, their lives shrinking with each move as they tried to outrun the debt he'd left behind. She told him about the nights she found her mother crying in the bathroom, thinking Maya couldn't hear, about how Patricia stopped laughing the same way, stopped singing while she cooked, stopped believing good things could happen to good people. She told him about the way her mother aged 10 years in two, the grey hair that came early, the permanent exhaustion carved into her face. And then she told him about the morning she found her mother dead. I was 24, Maya's voice cracked. I'd just gotten my first real freelance client. I was so excited to tell her we were going to be okay, that I could finally help with the bills. I knocked on her bedroom door, and she didn't answer. I thought she was sleeping in. She never slept in, she was always up at dawn. But I thought maybe, finally, she was resting. James's tears fell silently, but he didn't interrupt. I opened the door. She was on the floor. The paramedics said she'd been dead for at least 3 hours. Heart attack, massive. The medical examiner told me her heart showed signs of prolonged stress, years of it. He said it like it was a clinical observation. Years of stress. Like that was just a medical term and not a death sentence you gave her when you walked out that door. Maya. I held her hand in the hospital while they officially pronounced her dead. Her hand was cold. She died alone, Dad, on a bathroom floor, probably trying to get to her phone to call for help. And I was 3 rooms away, asleep, and I didn't hear anything. I didn't save her. Just like you didn't save her, we both failed her. The confession broke something open in Maya's chest. She'd never said that part out loud before. The guilt she carried for not hearing her mother, not waking up, not being there in those final moments. She'd been so focused on hating her father that she'd never examined her own guilt. James reached across the table, then stopped himself, uncertain if touch was allowed. Maya, your mother's death is not your fault. You were asleep. You were a kid trying to build a life. You didn't fail her. And you did? Yes. Completely. Absolutely. I failed her in every way a husband and father can fail. He pulled his hand back, gripped his coffee mug so hard Maya thought it might shatter. I can't undo that. I can't bring her back. I can't give you back those years. All I can tell you is that I've spent every day of the last 5 years trying to become someone she wouldn't be ashamed of. Someone you wouldn't be ashamed of. Why should I believe you've changed? James pulled out his phone, opened his photo gallery, and slid it across the table. Maya saw pictures. James at GA meetings holding his 5-year sobriety chip. James with a therapist, certificates from addiction recovery programs on the wall behind them. James volunteering at a youth center, teaching kids basic car maintenance. James with a small group of other recovering addicts, all of them holding coffee cups and looking tired but hopeful. I'm not asking you to believe me based on words, James said. I'm showing you 5 years of action. 5 years of showing up. 5 years of doing the work even when no one was watching, even when I thought I'd never see you again. I didn't get sober for you, Maya. I got sober because I couldn't live with myself anymore. But once I got clean, once I could finally see clearly, God, all I wanted was the chance to tell you I'm sorry, to tell you that you deserved better, to ask if, maybe, someday, you might let me try to be even a fraction of the father I should have been. Maya looked at the photos, looked at her father's face older, weathered, but clear-eyed in a way she'd never seen. The man in these photos looked nothing like the desperate, angry addict who'd abandoned them. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered. I don't expect you to. Not today. Maybe not ever. I don't know if I even want to forgive you. That's fair too. But I don't want to carry this anymore. The words surprised her, even as she said them. I've spent 10 years building my entire identity around being the girl whose father left. It's affected every relationship I've had, every job, every decision. I've let what you did define who I am. And I'm tired, Dad. I'm so tired of being angry. James's face crumpled. I'm so sorry for all of it, for the pain, for the years you lost, for making you carry this weight. Maya wiped her eyes. The cafe around them continued its normal rhythm, other diners eating, the waitress refilling coffee, the distant sound of traffic outside. The world kept spinning, even as hers tilted on its axis. "Here's what I'm willing to try," Maya said slowly, carefully, like testing ice that might crack beneath her. "We meet for coffee once a month. You tell me about your life, I'll tell you about mine. No expectations beyond that. No promises. No fairy tale reconciliation. Just, we try. If it works, maybe we increase it to twice a month. If it doesn't work, we stop. But at least we'll know we tried." James looked at her like she'd just given him the world. "I'll take it. God, Maya, I'll take any chance you're willing to give me. And you have to promise me something, anything. You have to keep going to meetings, keep going to therapy, keep doing the work. Because if you relapse, if you fall back into old patterns, I'm done. I won't watch you self-destruct again. I can't. I promise. I swear on your mother's memory, I promise." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Maya said something that surprised even herself. "Tell me about your life now. The good parts, not just the recovery. Tell me who you are when you're not apologizing." James's face brightened slightly, and for the next hour, he told her about his job at the auto repair shop, about the satisfaction of fixing broken things and making them work again. He told her about his small apartment in Newark, about the cat he'd adopted from a shelter. "Her name is Rosie, and she's the most judgmental creature I've ever met." He told her about coaching a youth basketball team on weekends, about finding purpose in helping kids stay out of trouble. And slowly, carefully, Maya found herself not forgiving him exactly, but maybe making space for the possibility of forgiveness somewhere down the road. When they finally left the cafe 3 hours later, James asked, "Can I hug you?" Maya hesitated, then nodded. The hug was awkward, tentative. Both of them uncertain where to put their arms, how long to hold on. But it was real, and when Maya pulled back, she felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years. A tiny crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. "Same time next month?" James asked. "Same time next month." As Maya rode the subway back to Manhattan, her phone rang. "Daniel, how did it go?" he asked immediately. "Terrible, painful, necessary." She paused. "How about you? Did you see Frank again?" "I'm at his apartment right now. We've been talking for 5 hours. We cried, we argued, we started planning family therapy sessions together. It's messy and uncomfortable, and nothing like I wrote about in my books. But it's real." Daniel's voice was lighter than she'd heard it in weeks. "Maya, I think we're going to be okay. Not perfect, not fixed, but okay." "Yeah," Maya said, watching Manhattan pass by through the subway window. "I think we might be too." 6 months later, the bookstore in Soho was packed wall to wall with people. Standing room only. Camera crews from morning shows, journalists with recording devices, and at the center of it all, Daniel Croix, sitting on a stage with his final book, Forgiving Forward, a memoir of imperfect healing. Maya stood at the back of the room, watching her boss know, her friend field questions from the audience. The book had debuted at #1 and hadn't budged since, but unlike his previous works, this one was different. raw, honest. It didn't promise easy answers or clean resolutions. It admitted doubt, struggle, failure, and the messy, non-linear path of real forgiveness. In the third row sat James Anderson. They'd met for coffee 7 times now. Last week, he'd met one of her friends. They were building something, not a recreation of what was lost, but something new, a relationship based on who they were now, not who they'd been. In the front row sat Frank Croix. He and Daniel were in family therapy, meeting weekly. They'd had dinners. They'd had arguments. They'd had breakthroughs and setbacks. They'd even taken a weekend trip to visit Frank's hometown, awkward and uncomfortable. But they'd done it together. Daniel had learned that forgiveness wasn't a destination, it was a journey, and he and Frank were still walking it, one difficult step at a time. A woman in the audience raised her hand. "Mr. Croix, what would you say is the hardest part of forgiveness?" Daniel paused, then smiled at Maya. "Actually, I'd like my colleague to answer that question. Maya, would you mind?" Every head in the bookstore turned. Maya felt panic rise. She hadn't prepared for this, hadn't expected to speak, but then she saw her father's encouraging smile, saw Daniel's trust in her, and she walked to the microphone. "The hardest part of forgiveness," Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "is forgiving yourself for the years you wasted holding on to anger, forgiving yourself for being human enough to hurt. My father." She glanced at James, who was crying quietly. "My father hurt me deeply. He destroyed my childhood and broke my family, and I had every right to be angry about that." The room was completely silent. "But I hurt myself by letting that pain define me for 10 years. I built walls so high that no one could get in. Not friends, not romantic partners, not opportunities. I told myself the walls were protecting me, but really they were just keeping me in prison. A prison I built myself." She looked at Daniel. "The billionaire author didn't just help me forgive my father. He helped me forgive myself for not being perfect in my pain, for being angry when I needed to be angry, for taking 10 years to be ready when that's how long it took, and for finally being brave enough to try something different." The applause started slowly, then built until the entire bookstore was standing, clapping, some people crying. When it finally quieted, Daniel spoke into his microphone. "Forgiveness isn't about condoning the hurt or forgetting the past. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment. It's not a single moment, but a journey often messy, incomplete, full of setbacks that requires more courage than holding a grudge. And sometimes the person you most need to forgive is yourself for being human." After the event, Maya found herself outside the bookstore with Daniel and both their fathers. 4 people, all imperfect, all carrying wounds, all trying. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," James said, and this time the words didn't feel like a violation. They felt earned. "Thanks, Dad." Daniel and Frank stood slightly apart, still learning how to navigate their own relationship, but they were there, together, trying. "We saved each other," Daniel said to Maya quietly. "No," Maya corrected. "We gave each other permission to save ourselves." And in that moment, standing on a Soho sidewalk with their imperfect fathers and their imperfect healing, both of them understood what forgiveness really meant. It wasn't erasing the past. It wasn't pretending the hurt never happened. It wasn't even necessarily reconciliation. It was simply this: choosing freedom over prison, choosing growth over stagnation, choosing to write a different ending than the one that seemed inevitable. It was choosing to forgive, not because the other person deserved it, but because you deserved to be free. Moral lesson: forgiveness is not about letting people off the hook for the pain they caused. It's about releasing the hook that's been buried in your own heart. It's not a single moment of grace, but an ongoing journey, often messy and incomplete, that requires more courage than holding a grudge. The person who hurt you may never change, may never deserve your forgiveness, may never even accept it. But forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you refusing to let their actions continue controlling your life years after they walked away. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive isn't the one who hurt you, it's yourself. Yourself for being hurt, for taking years to heal, for not being strong enough to get over it on someone else's timeline, for being human enough to carry wounds. But here's the truth: you deserved better than what happened to you. And you deserve better than spending your life imprisoned by anger at what happened. Forgiveness doesn't mean the relationship is restored. It doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you trust again. It just means you've decided to stop drinking the poison and expecting the other person to die. It means you're putting down the weight you've been carrying and walking forward lighter, freer, and finally living for yourself instead of for your pain. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about someone you need to forgive, or if it made you realize you need to forgive yourself, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Don't wait. Don't scroll past. Subscribe so you never miss another story that might change your perspective on life. Drop a comment below and tell me, is there someone you're holding a grudge against? Or is the hardest person for you to forgive yourself? Share your story. Your words might give someone else the courage to take their first step toward freedom. And if this story helped you in any way, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been carrying their pain for too long. Someone who deserves to know that forgiveness is possible even when it seems impossible. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances, not just for others, but for yourself. Because you deserve freedom from your pain. You deserve to write a different ending. Remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you can do. It's choosing your peace over their punishment. It's choosing your future over their past. It's choosing freedom. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll explore more journeys of healing, redemption, and the courage it takes to become who we're meant to be. Until then, be kind to yourself, forgive yourself, and remember, you're worth the work. Subscribe, comment, share, and let's walk this journey toward freedom together. The end.